2, 1, recording.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, welcome, and thank you so much, everybody, for coming this evening. It's an absolute pleasure to be sharing the stage, the virtual stage, with some, highly esteemed colleagues that I have with me today. So I'm going to just spend a couple of minutes introducing myself, and then hand over to Camille to say a few words about himself. So my name is Amanda, and along with Jannine, we are the co-directors of a community interest company, which is a social enterprise called Neurodiversity Networks, that we set up, nearly 2 years ago now, in the hope that we could support and advise all communities with all things around neurodiversity. And Jannine and I are both diagnosed with ADHD as adults. Also, I have a background, 20 years in education, and in particular social, emotional, mental health, and I have a particular interest in neurodevelopmental conditions. But we felt that there needed to be a conversation around things that perhaps we were not best placed to be knowing about or advising on, as two white, female, relatively middle class ex-teachers. There is only so much that we can do and know without calling upon the expertise of other people. And I think admitting and accepting one's limitations sometimes is the best way forward. So that is kind of where this conversation has stemmed from. So I'll hand over to Camille and he can introduce himself. Thanks.
Amanda, thank you very much. Well, firstly, welcome everybody, and thank you for taking the opportunity to join us this evening. My name's Gamie Yafai, and I'm a diversity and inclusion strategist. I've worked in this area for 20 years, and one of my goals with what I do is to support organisations to see the value in recruiting and developing individuals who are neurodiverse. And over the last 5 years, we've seen huge awareness raised in how brilliant individuals are who are neurodiverse. And that's growing and growing. So more and more organizations are actually focusing on targeting individuals who are neurodiverse. However, that's not really why I'm here to talk to you this evening. I'm also a father. My son's called Gabe, and he's coming on for 19. However, at the age of 4, he was diagnosed with dyspraxia. At the age, I think it was 7, ADHD. At the age of 12, autism. And Gabe has hated every single day of preschool, primary school, and secondary school. And I felt hugely, and I still feel hugely at fault as a parent, because I thought teachers knew what they were doing. I thought SEN knew exactly what they were doing, but I was proven wrong. And it took me 12 years to really understand how to support my child and how to push the education establishment a lot further in order to get what we needed for my child. At the age of 14, we got an email from the assistant head saying, we'd like to manage your child out of school because he wasn't performing. And instantly, because I knew my stuff, I threatened them with disability discrimination, and instantly he got something like 7 additional hours of support one-to-one. what we also did then, because we knew there were huge gaps in his learning because of his ADHD, running around classrooms, you know, if a teacher said to him, whoever gets to the front of the class first, you know, will get something, he would climb over the desks, you know, everybody else would run round. But the key here is we got him, you know, we could afford to get him a tutor. It was only an hour a week for English and maths, but by the time he was 16, he had caught up so much. He did his GCSEs, he got, from failing at 14, at 16, because we pushed the school really hard, he got 8 Bs and an A. The sad thing is, when he left school, we convinced him to go to college, but the condition that he put in front of us was that if he went to college, there was no way at all that we could tell the college that he had autism, dyspraxia, or ADHD, which went totally against everything that I tried to push for. However, he pushed himself, and he left college with 2 distinctions and a merit without any support whatsoever. However, he was lucky that we got him additional support. But there is so much more that you can get for your children. You really do have to push. And just by using, you know, disability discrimination, it will get you so much more support. But you need to talk to the right people. And, you know, and there are a whole host of individuals, both in this forum and, as I'm sure, delegates today, who will be able to help you. So I'm going to pass you over to Atif, but we're going to take questions in probably about 10 minutes. So prepare your questions for us. Thank you. Atif, over to you.
Thanks, Camille. Yeah, hello everybody. I really am going to just start by just saying what a wonderful way to have or finish a Mother's Day. I know it can't be easy because it's vital time with the family, and it's righteously good time to be pampered, really. And so sitting on another Zoom call on a Sunday is a real testament, I guess, to motherhood itself. And for all of us that play that role, whether we're mothers or not, that sense of care and giving up time and being so frankly worried for our kids and their futures, and the participation that we desperately need and want to see. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about me, and then I guess try and give that space if it needs any, but also more importantly, just to reiterate, this is really your session, and this really is about you coming forward, not necessarily on this Zoom if it doesn't feel safe, but certainly coming forward to participate and ask what challenges you're worried about, and most of all, what do you need most to feel heard? I say that from my personal perspective. Growing up, I grew up on a big famous council estate. Some of you might know it. They filmed a show called Clockwork Orange, or Misfits there. It's called Thamesmead. And in Thamesmead, where we grew up, and my name's Atif, by the way, so I should say that. People didn't leave going to university or college. We all left school at 16. I'm a dyslexic learner. I struggled a lot throughout my life, mostly just to look at people, and I'll touch on that later on, but just to look at people was in itself was something. It says a lot about self-esteem and how people feel about themselves and where they insist on belonging, and if they can. So anyhow, so I grew up in a space where people didn't talk about learning differences at all, and it was a different time as well, 80s, glorious days. But we didn't talk about those things. And when things were talked about, if they were, a certain group of people, I guess, got invited to talk about those things, and a certain group weren't. That really, and for me, that speaks to the heart of what we're here for. The idea that so many people can participate with struggle, and it really has to be said, but with struggle, but people can participate in the discussions around neurodiversity and how to build advocacy support for their needs and for their children's needs. And that there are other people just really, for a number of reasons, struggling to participate. And in some ways, that's a structural discussion. Some ways, that's a social economic discussion. And in some ways, that's a discussion about shame and what it means to us as a culture or a community. And in some ways, it's just because we're just not sure what to do and we don't know where to get the information. And we're not in a social circle or a social economic circle that gets to talk about ADHD, dyslexia or dyspraxia or learning differences at all, or that there are people out there that are building support. I didn't really get to have those discussions in my life till I was a lot older. To a certain extent, it was in my early 30s that it really had meaning for me. And I got to rebuild and reclaim my life in a way, in a nice way, in a really good way, actually, and lots of goodness to that. But it took time and it took a rewiring. And I mostly say it took a lot of unlearning. I really say that, unlearning. So, but by going through that process, I was able to talk about it in my 30s to my parents. Yeah, it's a bit, and that's different, but it's getting them to understand things and realizing that it's not a part of their journey or part of their discussion circles. But the good news is I was able to build a company, a social enterprise that's really well known now. It's called Diversity and Ability. We support disabled and neurodiverse learners right across the country. We've supported about 26,000 people now. It went on to win Disability Consultancy of the Year this year. Mostly, I'm more excited by being able to say all those awards and things are lovely, but I look back on it and I still think, here we are, a team of 185 people, all working with neurodiverse stories. But we're also people who got to create a company that we needed when we were younger. Yeah, and that's really important about being able to participate when you're younger. So I'm going to stop there and really want to really just respond to the enthusiasm that you guys have as parents who are giving up your precious time for your loved ones, and really make that as meaningful as possible. We'll always, I'm sure, I mean, with Jannine and Amanda and Gamie, there'll be some great resources here and they'll be made available for all of you. But do use this time, even at this moment or later on.
I just want to quickly say hi before we start with all of that. My name is Jannine and I work closely with Amanda, but I think as Amanda said, there was this gulf in us when we were looking at our offering to the world. And it was like, well, why are we not, and when I was recruiting, I was like, why am I not attracting applications from people who don't look like me, who are not white, British, female? That was what we were attracting in our offering, and that really causes me a problem, and as we also said, the working in schools and looking at the young people in front of me, I was aware quite quickly that the young people with a diagnosis were those who were white, not necessarily those of other ethnicities. And I'm wanting to ask the question of sort of like why, and I wanted to unpick that, because that's something that we need to address, because it's not that those people have less prevalence of those conditions, it's that identification of those conditions is lower. And why, and what as parents can we do to support that? I've got 3 children, all of them are neurodiverse. My eldest has autism and ADHD. She was diagnosed with Asperger's when she was 8, and then ADHD was added when she was 19. My son quickly followed, but then I followed after that, and then my daughter, who is on the gifted and talented, although I would say all children are gifted and talented their own way, but she was on the gifted and talented programme. We couldn't get her taken seriously, and we found that experience very othering, because she looked the part, but she wasn't the part, but it was still very othering. We couldn't get that acceptance. And I think that we need to talk about that in terms of lots of different facets, and ethnicity and religion and everything else needs to come into the discussion. And that was, I've been saying about this, and somebody said, I know some people that you might want to have this discussion with, and that's how today happened. So I just wanted to quickly say hello, and that was the sort of like the motivation behind it. And as Amanda said, we were putting together a conference and we couldn't find professionals, or we didn't know, we weren't connected to professionals who were good at what they did, but weren't white British, but now we have those, don't we? Because we have these lovely people in front of us as well. So for us, that's part of the mission, was about addressing that that shortfall. And as we're setting up a building and a new offering, we want to do it right. And I can guarantee you there's lots of people out there like us who want to do it right but don't know how. So I'm hoping that some of those people are here watching, and that we can actually start to think about how we change our offering so that we are more inclusive. So just wanted to put that there. But as Atif said, you know, it's about you guys now and what you would like to know as parents. We are teachers and we are professionals, but we're also parents and are neurodiverse ourselves, generally speaking. So what is it that you would like to know?
Jannine, shall I do the Menti? Because
Yes.
The final question on the Menti is literally finding out what difficulties individuals are having. So
Yep.
Hopefully we'll get some feedback through there.
Super.
So, okay, let me see if I can share my Menti. Bear with me a second. So actually, do you want to keep talking for about a minute or two while I just get this up?
I was just going to say that, you know, if there's anybody here who's joined who hasn't consciously joined from a parent perspective, but has joined because of interest or another reason, obviously do feel free to still ask questions, or you know, if there are things that you would like to know from any of us whilst we've got this opportunity. Obviously we would, you know, we'd love to hear from those of you who are here to try and better support your children, but if there's anyone who doesn't fit that category, then please know that you are very welcome to comment or ask questions.
Okay, can you all see the screen?
I can indeed.
Brilliant. Okay. Yep. Menti is, you're going to have to access Menti via your phones. So all you have to do is type in menti.com or www.menti.com, and it will ask you for a code. And the code's at the very top of this screen. So it's 88379566. With Menti, it is totally anonymous. So we do not know who's asking these questions, or who's answering these questions, should I say. So I'm going to give you a minute just to input the first, or the response to the first question, which is, what learning difference may your child have? Some of you, your children will be diagnosed, some of them may not, but what if you don't have a diagnosis? What do you think they may have? Okay, I love the brilliance. Okay, so we've got a number of ASDs, ADHD, anxiety. No children, it doesn't matter. You know, again, if you don't have children, see this as a learning opportunity. So very introverted, okay. Expressive language, okay. So we've got a mix of different differences, shall we say. Question number 2, how have you found accessing support?
And I guess in terms of support, that could mean many different things, couldn't it, Gamie? You know, it might just be the battle that you have daily with the teaching assistant or class teacher who just isn't interested in hearing anything that you know about your child. it might be that, or it might be, you know, trying to get an EHCP, or then trying to get the appropriate support through the EHCP. I'm sure there are many different levels that people have found it difficult.
Yeah, and also in terms of, you know, physical support for you and mental support for you. You know, being able to leave your child with somebody, and you know, we didn't go out for 10 years as parents. Well, didn't go out for dinner for 10 years. So, you know, as I say, everybody's different. So we've got obstructive, judgmental, constant battle, nightmare, you know, frustrating and demeaning. You know, and believe me, I've experienced most of these, but not all of them. And every single parent experiences things differently. So my next question, where have you found support? Where's been the best place for you to get support? Again, this is an opportunity to share, because not everybody is able to find support. That's incredible. You really do find out who your friends are. I've got a feeling others are putting stuff up, but it doesn't look like it's.
Yeah, I think, Gamie, I think if you're looking on your phone, things are kind of coming through, but it's not.
Are they?
It's just not. I don't know if you need to click the little arrow to go up on your screen to see.
Yeah, no, it's
some other.
If you've got it on your screen, can you just read out some of the comments?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and also, I appreciate someone's just commented that actually the technology they're using isn't compatible with this. So, and I apologize. But if you're comfortable using the chat, then please, absolutely. This was only a kind of an additional way of hopefully making it anonymous.
Yeah.
So, support found. Some things have come up. So parents, a support group, affordable ICT. So that's information and communication technology.
Yeah.
I know Atif wanted to say a few things about kind of assistive technology and things as well at some point later.
Yeah.
Third sector. So that's sort of charities or kind of voluntary groups, online, friendships. I think that's all it's showing me at the moment.
Thank you for that.
Oh, Facebook groups, actually.
Facebook group,
and ADHD and ASD charities.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. Final question. What do you want help with? So, you know, and then again, hopefully this will guide us to be able to, well, answer some of your questions and support some of the areas that you need help with. So, Amanda, this may come up for you.
Yeah, I'm just seeing whether I have to finish. Oh dear. Let's have a look. I think I may have just signed myself out by mistake. I'm really sorry. Yeah. I seem to have I couldn't move on from the previous question. So I don't know if anyone else has, I don't know if Jannine's got it on her phone, but
well, I'm just
apologies.
That's okay. I'm trying to sign in myself whether I can see what people are putting. Can everybody else access it? What do you want help with?
I'm just going to see if it will email me anything. But I mean, please, by all means, if you're struggling
Well,
a bit,
yeah.
and you're happy to put it in.
So the things that have been added are reaching other cultures to hear about their experiences locally, training awareness, raising for teachers and schools, connecting to others, obtaining diagnosis.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well done, Jannine.
Thank you.
Who wants to take the obtaining diagnosis? Because that's quite a difficult one.
Isn't it just?
Yes.
I guess before kind of even jumping into any explanation, the first question I suppose would be just, you know, thinking about what it is you want to, what you want the outcome to be, as you know, your reasons for wanting to have a diagnosis. Not that I'm questioning anyone getting a diagnosis at all, but I think that's just a really important thought process to go through, and sometimes that takes it to be a discussion with somebody. What do you think a diagnosis is going to do or change?
Well, one of the criteria for getting a diagnosis is that it must be useful. So it is worth considering before you start down that road where you feel it will help your child in terms of getting that diagnosis in the first place. And then you probably, well, sadly, you may well experience the pushback of, oh, well, it's just a label and we should steer clear of labelling children, which I would say that only really counts if you consider a diagnosis, not a label, because they're not labels, they're diagnoses, to be a negative thing. So is a diagnosis or a label a negative thing? And I would say no. I would say it's a key to understanding where a child might need some support. But you would need to question the ideology of somebody who said, well, we don't want to be labelling, which of course we don't want to be giving people diagnosis they don't need, so it must be useful. So that inquiry is reasonable, but just have that in your minds. And then really, ideally, the process is done through schools, through the SENCO starting the process and asking for support to come in. And Amanda used to be that support in various areas of the country, didn't you, Amanda?
Yep, indeed, yes. So I started life as just a good old class teacher, and then SENCO. But for many years, have worked within local authorities in an advisory kind of capacity. So often, I was kind of one of the first professionals to be talking to parents and teachers about a child who perhaps has, you know, somebody's raised some concerns, and sometimes that was the parent, sometimes the school. But yeah, those very early stages is often where I would start out my work with families.
Atif, any thoughts? Well, I say any thoughts, I'm sure you have.
Yeah, I mean, same thing, just to echo that point. It's really it's hard work. It's really hard. It's brave work. It's, you know, parents, those of you who are asking questions about the diagnosis, it should be made a lot easier for you to get one. It's, in fact, it's quite expensive. But secondly, is really, there needs to be some work being done on why you want one. Yeah, absolutely. And it's not easy. I don't think you can have an easy answer to that, but it's trying to navigate the best that you can want for the most precious person in your life. So it's understandable that we would really want a diagnosis. I would say absolutely to really look at how, first and foremost, before a diagnosis, consider screening. Like, what is it that shows you how your child learns? And then pause for some time and have a think about what is, because what's more important isn't a diagnosis or a label, but rather the impact. What is the impact of a learning difference? What is the self-esteem loss? What's the sense of shame or stigma? Sometimes I think a diagnosis, and sometimes people will go from this, and if we think, and we're going to touch on this, but we look at young adolescents who are coming from BAME communities, and the idea of certain communication cues or just big young black lads, you know, they're going from the rush from going from being a bad boy to a diagnosis is almost like going from bad to sick. What we're not really doing is pausing long enough to say, what do we want? And what is the good stuff that this shows us? Where's the brilliance that the diagnosis is going to uncover for us? It takes but that's really easier said than done. So it's really taking a pause and saying, how do we get access to diagnosis? And fundamentally, how do we get excited about saying no to one if we don't need one? So that's informed choices. I would really like everyone to be able to access informed choices easily to say, yes, I can get a diagnosis. Yes, it costs this much. And yes, it will tell me this much. It will only tell me this much. But I would like to know.
Okay.
Or I would like to not bother because I understand far more about the impact and not the importance of a diagnosis.
Okay, as a parent, yeah, and I'm just reading a comment in the chat. If you don't label your child, others will. And if your child is categorized as naughty, disruptive, and annoying, would you have them diagnosed, or would you continue to, get constant feedback from teachers and other parents about how naughty your child is? When do you decide the right time to have a diagnosis is?
I would say when it's evident their needs aren't being met. And that's what it's useful for. It's identifying what those needs are and making sure that they're met. Because behaviour is communication. So if a child is behaving a certain way, if they are being annoying, well, that's probably because they're frustrated. So, if they're being disruptive, well, maybe that's because they're understimulated or not getting what they need in some respect or other, or they need to move, yet the education system requires them to sit down and be quiet when what they need to be doing is moving and talking. So from that point of view, that's where I would say that the assessments are worthwhile. You should be able to get them through the school system, through the SENCO, through the CAMS paediatrician, an educational psychologist route. That's how it should work. Sadly, it doesn't always work that way. And for myself and Amanda, we've come out of the system largely because of such frustrations, and we exist as an organisation because there is a shortfall between what the system will provide and what families need, and we try to sort of like fill that in, but that's what you guys do as well in a different way. But it's important work, and we have a problem with underdiagnosis in the UK. Just to talk about ADHD for just 1 second, there is this public perception that ADHD is overdiagnosed and overmedicated, and it isn't. 1 in 5 children has ADHD, only 1 in 3 are diagnosed, and only 1% are medicated. So in the UK, there isn't an issue with overdiagnosing and overmedicating. I'm not saying there isn't in the rest of the world. I would argue we maybe get tarred with that brush, and that there is always reason to sort of stop and question whether we've got it right. But actually, I would say in the UK, not just for ADHD, for all of the conditions, I'll speak about dyslexia in a second, it's difficult to get a diagnosis, and families have to fight to get a diagnosis. And going back to Atif's comment about having to go private and that process, I was sat with a fellow teacher and I said, I think that this person needs an assessment for dyslexia. Why? She said. I'm like, because I think that's a barrier to her being able to achieve. Well, we don't bother to assess for dyslexia because it wouldn't change the way we teach them. Why? Was my answer, why would it not change the way you teach? And that's a teacher in a special school. And that's the frustration that we found within the education system that is very frustrating. There is more of a move to addressing the dyslexia being one of the ones that actually they're very slow to pick up on schools, very, very slow. And because there's nothing in the criteria there's nothing in the rule book that says they have to. So they don't. Often picked up at college and university.
What can parents, sorry Amanda, can I have a question to you? Yeah. What can parents do to push for a diagnosis?
Okay, so firstly, it does depend on what you are looking for a diagnosis of. Unfortunately, at the moment, in most areas, there is a very splintered approach to needs. So you're almost forced to make a decision about what you think your child what need your child has, and then you have to kind of go down that one route. So just as an example, ADHD, that will be dealt with more often than not by one service, very often CAMHS. Autism may very well be dealt with by a completely separate service. So there are some examples where local authorities are trying to have a neurodevelopmental team. So it wouldn't matter what difficulties that child has, everything would be looked at. So they would look at sensory processing, they would look at dyslexia, developmental coordination, the whole neurodevelopmental spectrum. But that is not the norm. So that's the first thing to say, is that it depends really what it is you're wanting. Unfortunately, also Jannine is correct, and in around dyslexia, it's basically schools do not diagnose dyslexia. Dyslexia is basically not diagnosed. So if you want a dyslexia diagnosis, the only option is private. I do not know, I could be wrong, so please correct me, anybody that knows different, but in 20 years, and I've worked across 4 different local authorities, I do not know a single child who has been had more than a screening for dyslexia, if you're lucky, in school, but there's nowhere to refer to for that. It is private or not. And then obviously ADHD and autism, either you would go through your school SENCO, who would then make the appropriate referrals. You could also go to your GP. And I think different areas have very different stories about how successful that is, whether they tend to bat backwards and forwards. The GP will say, no, you need to go through school. And then the school may well say, well, we don't really see it. So if you're really worried, go to your GP, and you just go backwards and forwards and end up tearing your hair out. But those are the main kind of routes in, would be through the school SENCO or your GP.
Thank you. Atif, you are going to talk, I can't remember what you were going to add, but over to you.
Yeah, well, I don't have much to add on this. I think the issue of the diagnosis is a sheer wrongdoing. I mean, socioeconomically, the legacy of it is, and I'm sure, I'm not saying anything that no one on this panel or the parents listening, won't already attribute to. This becomes a class diagnosis. It becomes a class issue of those who can afford to participate and those who can't. So what we end up is a social circle of people who can advocate through struggle, but advocate for their children if they come from a particular class background. And there are those coming from a working class background that don't necessarily have the resources to know how to navigate this, or the cost to pay for it privately. The knock-on impact of that is huge, because you have somebody who may be able to access support quite young, quite early, and they're in a class discussion that can have a positive impact throughout life. Because neurodiversity doesn't have to be so problematized. It doesn't have to be so negative. We can even build, and we've yet to do it well, I think, anywhere in the country, a diagnosis that isn't so deficit-based. But regardless of that, just parking that for the moment, we have to get to a point where we can say, this is the impact on this individual. And this impact is sadly made harder because of socioeconomics, sadly made harder because parents are migrants, or sadly made harder because it's not an issue of pride in this family, it's an issue of stigma, etc. So we've got to figure out what is the impact that a diagnosis does, and make that as easy as possible. The knock-on effect really is, sometimes I worry far more about the self-esteem of people when they're not accessing a diagnosis, or when they're not accessing a sense of pride in the way that they learn as adults, and what may have happened as a result of this complication that we're talking about as children.
classes, and it's a huge issue, and it's something that we very rarely talk about, but it genuinely disadvantages groups. I'm not saying there's a simple way of overcoming class, because if you've got no money, you've got no money. And there isn't an easy way around it. But is there support out there anywhere that individuals can get if they don't have the money for a diagnosis?
I can tell you that is our intention from Northampton, from our Northamptonshire base, because I'm doing the exams access arrangements assessor qualification now, and the next one after that is the dyslexia assessor. Then we would be able to do it on a sliding scale of affordability, so that can happen. But it's going to take lots of people to do that, isn't it, for it to become effective and normal for schools to say, well, you can go there and you can get that. But why would a school not pay for it? And if you're talking socioeconomic, okay, well, potentially you're looking then at pupil premium. So for families on free school meals, the pupil premium can be used to maybe assess for those sorts of things. But I don't know, is that complicated? Is it more complicated than that, Amanda?
Well, I think it is, because I think there are equally, even that system still leaves a huge chunk of families who just slip through that gap between the two. An assessment that might be hundreds of pounds is not is going to be difficult, but they also don't meet necessarily the criteria for pupil premium. And I think and that's also where the work that hopefully we'll be able to be doing with the community interest company is attempting to make a lot of these things more accessible. But if we moved more towards this model in any case of looking at the child as a whole, then actually it wouldn't be a dyslexia assessment. It would be assessing that child's executive functions and looking at processing, and actually then you would learn a whole lot more about that child. So it's, I guess that goes back to what we were saying about what is it that you actually want, and what is the impact, as Atif was saying, of not doing, getting the a particular diagnosis or assessment. As we know, all of these things tend to sit hand in hand with each other. There's very rarely, and Gamil's son Gabe is a really good example of, they rarely travel alone. It's almost, if you suspect your child has dyslexia, there's a pretty good likelihood that there might be other difficulties around executive functioning or sensory processing or attention or social communication, even if they're not at a kind of clinical even if they don't actually meet the criteria for a diagnosis. So I think somewhere or places that understand the whole child is a good place for parents to go to start talking about, how to help and
I agree.
What to do.
Yeah, I agree.
Atif, were you going to add something to that question? I saw your finger up a minute ago.
No, not really. I think it just, I guess I want to be, I'm going back to the theme of why, we're talking about this in the context of a BAME audience and multiculturalism. And the distinctions are that it's hard to get a diagnosis regardless of skin color. It really is. And it isn't about skin color as this is about participation. And those who find it easier to participate and those who can't, or less resourced. That will interplay into skin color. It will interplay into socioeconomics, and it will interplay into class. So the key thing is really that you're not alone in this. We need to see a future of this needs to be, and I think Amanda's touched on it really well. For my son, he's 9 years old. He is the brilliance that I put him down on and mentee. So that was me. But I guess I'm not interested in how well he performs on a test. Really, I want to know how much the school is excited by his imagination. But at the same time, I'd be alone and probably wrong if I was really sure, absolutely sure that he'll be fine, because I don't know that at all, and I think I'm mostly quite afraid for him, but at the same time excited because it's a different time, you know. Things were, you know, and he does make eye contact. He looks at the world. He's not afraid of it. So I guess it's really saying is, how do we make this easier? And I go back to the screening thing, is that we need to see more people excited about seeing screening early, but that screening should have more weight than it does. And sadly, it doesn't have enough weight. So that's when we get into these cost dynamics, and they reinforce the polarization around class. And we need to see that change. I also think that we need to have more folks modeling, more brown people, more brown kids modeling. The way that I think Greta Thunberg is a really good example. She does something very beautiful to model not just the urgency of climate change, but autism for young girls. We need to see more kids modeling difference, coming from different skin colors and cultures and classes, you know.
So
do you not think, sorry, can I just quickly jump in? Do you not think the issue here is that most of our ethnic minority groups in the UK actually live in the most disadvantaged communities in the UK? So we're not going to see the numbers because they're not going to be diagnosed, and they're not going to be able to shine the same as other individuals.
Absolutely. And also, I mean, bear this in mind as well. I'll say this as a brown person as I can, in the context as however limited that is to be one person. But I think there's a lot of people that might relate to this. The moment when you are coming up to being at 14, choosing your GCSEs as a brown kid, your mother, you know, and some of you, it's happened to you guys, with love on Mother's Day, but it says, you know, you must do more. You must do more. Now, they're not saying you're not studying hard enough, or you're not, they're just saying in this world, to be brown in this world as a kid, you've got to do more. You've got to achieve more. It's not equal for us out there. So if you must do more, then you will share less when you're older. Your parents will share less if they can.
We have a question from somebody, from Nikita.
Yeah, got your hand up.
Do you want to take yourself off mute and ask it?
Hi. Oh, looks frozen.
Nikita, if you can't speak for any reason, do you want to put your question in the chat?
Hi, hello everybody.
Hi.
You know, what can we do in get more BAME involvement in the? And I think oh, hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, just about.
Just about.
Yeah, it's just a bit slow, but we can hear you.
We can hear you.
I'll turn my video off because I'll turn my video off because that will probably help with the sound.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Nikita?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
We lost you. You keep coming in and out.
Got you now, though.
Yep.
Oh, have you got me? Perfect. I've turned my video off because some people say that helps. So basically, what I think might help people from the BAME community to be more involved in neurodiversity and to be able to come forward if their child does need an assessment is more understanding. Basically, I have a 13-year-old. My son, I've got 2 children, 2 teenagers. My son was he was referred for screening twice when he was younger. He was referred at 5 and then he was referred at 10. When he was referred at 5, I got something through the post, a questionnaire with tons of questions on. I ripped it up and put it in the bin. I didn't know what it was, why the doctor had done this, and I thought it was a negative thing. I didn't believe in labeling my child. I always just thought it was something that white people had. And so I didn't take my son for a screening for ADHD. Then he was referred by primary school when he was 10. I received the questionnaire, and this time I looked at the questions and I scored it all low because I thought it was a negative thing. Again, it had been framed to me. This time they'd explained it, but in the way it was explained to me and how I processed it, it sounded like a negative thing. And I think if someone on those two occasions had sat down with me and explained it in a way that I could understand, I'd probably have gone along with the process, because I had seen that there was always something with my son, and people had always commented, you know, he's 100 miles an hour, he's this, you know, I saw all the signs, but it's just, I'd always, in my head, it was framed as a very negative thing. I didn't know the word neurodiversity. I didn't know the word ADHD. I didn't know why they were sending me all these papers. We had to circle 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. And that's why I hadn't brought him forward. So now fast forward to he's in year 7 at secondary school, and I'm learning a little bit more. I meet someone and she has an autistic ADHD diagnosed daughter, and I'm like, oh, yep, she's like my son. Okay, is this what it is? So I've now tried to obtain an assessment for him. However, the secondary school who've just met him within a year and a half, they've scored him low on everything, because they don't know him very well. And this is sort of where the difficulty ensues, is that all along I'd been trying to sort of mask, to hide things, to try to get no one involved, because I didn't want to do this thing. I didn't understand it, and now I understand it, and now I see the traits that, the traits, so to speak. I now want him to be able to have this diagnosis, because I feel that it will he's had a lot of anxiety in the past because of not having the diagnosis, and I now understand it, because he was always sort of labeled as the naughty boy. He was excluded, internal exclusions. He was always in detention, always told off, and I always just thought he was lazy, naughty, but he wasn't. And now I'm trying to push for this. It's now quite difficult, because he's of an age where it's not as apparent as when he was younger, because it changes, how it presents changes. And so I think, do you all think as well that perhaps when children are young, there's some parents, I was a young parent, I'm 35 now, but when he was little, I was in my early 20s. Do you think that perhaps practitioners should really sit a parent down and frame it in a different way, to sort of explain it to us? Because as a young Black parent, this was we never spoke about neurodiversity in my household. It was never a thing. It just wasn't I come from Jamaican background. We don't talk about that. I didn't know about it. And I think that would be helpful. And I don't know how to feed that through. And I wonder if any other mums out there are, young mums coming up now, are having a similar thought pattern to what I did when my children were young.
That's really, really useful insight, Nikita. Not sure what to do about it, but it's really, really...
Except we're going to hold on to you now.
Yeah.
Not let you go.
Right, send me an email. We need to have this conversation. So I'm going to put my email address in the chat, and it'd be really lovely if you could touch base, because we need to brainstorm that, don't we? We need to work through what that is, so that we reach the people that need reaching.
Do you want to know what you can do, Jannine?
Yeah.
I mean this in the best possible way. There are lots of different African and African Caribbean organisations. We've got Friends of the Caribbean. I live in Milton Keynes, and we've got Friends of the Caribbean. It would be brilliant if somebody could go in there and do a talk to parents with them.
Absolutely. And, just invite me, I'll go.
We'll catch up on this, because honestly, there are loads of different community organisations that needs help, just need to understand, because the term neurodiverse, even for us, is is quite recent. But autism, ADHD, Asperger's, etc. have been around for years and years and years. But even then, communities don't have the conversation, and it is a bit of a taboo within communities. But we need to open it up, because we need to show the importance not just of having a diagnosis, but just talking about it and having that option or that choice.
I think people like myself and Jannine, then we need people like Nikita, and we need to be allies, because in order to know you know, where to go, how to connect, and how not to just rock up and sound like yet another kind of typical, you know, white person telling everybody else what to do and how to do it, which we're not, but you know, because of how our kind of how our lot has turned out, that we need to do it together in a sense, don't we? You know, we need to hear these voices to know how we can now work together. Jeanette's got her hand up.
Oh, hi. I wanted to add that, sorry, I recently was diagnosed with ADHD, and I recently came out to my family, and the response wasn't what I'd hoped for. When I came out to my aunt, she repeated, "But you're normal, you're normal." She desperately wanted me to be normal. And I went through with her some things that I remembered from my early childhood and teenage years. And she said, but that was normal. Like, I explained about my erratic behavior with, you know, substances, with sexuality and all these things, but I didn't do it in the way a teenager does it. Everything I did was extreme. And I think she still wasn't able to identify that that was ADHD. I was never able to be still. I would start things and not finish them. And so I think even now, there's still that, I think there is still that lack of awareness. And I would have thought, okay, my experience with my son happened almost a decade ago now, but I think there is still a lot of barrier there to people wanting to be able to understand it. I think even though they know about the words now, I think they just are, like my family members, my uncle who I told and my aunt, they're just refusing to accept neurodiversity. And I'd like to understand why. I didn't have the conversation with my aunt because it was too big a conversation to have, and I could see she was very closed. But you know, I don't, if you could, you know, I don't know how to reach people in, you know, regarding neurodiversity, reach BAME people, you know, even just my close family members. It's really difficult.
Thank you, Nikita. I guess us holding events like this is helpful, and then it's a question of how to do that so that we've got more of that. Jeanette, did you want to speak?
No, that was
Hi,
Jeanette.
Can you hear me?
Oh, sorry. No,
no, that was Nikita. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I know you're coming up against time now, so just wanted to say I'm pleased this event is taking place. Atif, hi. Atif and I know each other. We've had conversations about this on a number of occasions. So I am the parent of a dyspraxic son. He's an adult now, so I can identify with lots of the conversations that have taken place. My parents are Jamaican, so Nikita, I understand what you are saying, and I'm also a practitioner. So I've been a tutor, I've worked with adults, worked in an FP college for many years, worked in universities for many years, and now I coach people in the workplace. So I'm glad we've got to this bit. I think it's a shame that, you know, time is almost running out, because I think there are huge issues around race, including, as you said at the beginning, the lack of diversity in the practitioner community. So I'm one of them. And Atif knows that I have been making my voice heard about the implications of not having more diversity. And that links into the conversation about who gets screening, who gets assessment, you know, what the best practice is. The lack of diversity there means that people have been missing from the conversation, which is what Atif was saying at the beginning.
Yes.
So we need more, but they are there, and they're doing a great job, well beyond their day job often. So they are the people who will often speak to people like your aunt, Nikita, you know, often in their own time, unpaid. They're the people that members of the community will ring up and have those conversations with, and they need to be supported more. There are a number of organisations, Atif's is one, that you can get in contact with. Another one is Aspire to Inspire Dyslexia, who do fantastic work. They're based in Wandsworth. I don't know where you are, Nikita, and I'm connected to them as well, so you can get to me through them. But I would just say, you know, and I agree with the point about stigma. There's also very much a structural aspect to this. So there are many people who do not see neurodiversity as deficit. There are many parents who see the brilliance, many Black and Asian and minority ethnic parents who see the brilliance of their children and come up against the problematizing of their children in schools. So it's the stigma conversation often ends up being quite one-dimensional, and that concerns me a lot. It needs to be far more nuanced. So I completely appreciate what's being said here about stigma and taboo and where that's coming from. But there are many, many people who actually will see the brilliance of their children. It often happens, I can speak about the Black community, in supplementary schools, where they don't get caught up in the labelling debate, which takes you down a rabbit hole. They focus on the strengths of their children. So I just want to kind of, you know, add a positive note to this, that there are people who are advocating on your behalf. We're doing our best to try and connect you up with those people. And again, I work with people like yourselves just to make sure that there is that understanding in the practitioner community as well. So just wanted to kind of say a quick thing there, and I'll stop there.
Thanks, Jeanette. That was fascinating. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because when I said to other people that I was looking to do this, to have as a white British female, to have this discussion, people said, "Oh, careful." And yes, careful, but still got to do it, because if we don't do it, if we don't have these conversations, I can't not be part of this conversation, because I want to be part of the solution. So I have to be part of this conversation. And I just found that fascinating, that it was like, you know, oh, go careful with that. You're going to get, you know, you're feeding yourself to the lions. It's just like, we've just got to do this because it's important.
Can I just jump in on this one? So absolutely. I mean, look, there's a challenge here that we all have, which is about knowing and loving that we live in a multicultural world, and we're so stronger because of it. Yeah, because of those. The challenge is that these realities hit, and it's true, and this is the intersectionality of it. It hits people differently, depending on the class they're from, depending from the gender, depending on the socioeconomics. And so because of that, the challenge we've got is to say, how do we make the space really accessible to other people who don't know how to fit in? The allies play every role, because it supports the space that makes it work, but it's not going to be on its own enough. What it takes, and Janet really sort of touched on it, is it's modeling. It's seeing, can we see more people that look like us framing this? Are they making organizations? Are they hosting spaces? Are they talking about their children? This is a really good example, because here we are, you know, as practitioners and as parents holding this space. But that shame and stigma, it doesn't go away if white families are the ones saying, hey, it doesn't matter. Because that shame and stigma has to be going away, because we're seeing brown people making it go away, because they're talking about it. When I see Richard Branson talking about dyslexia, it doesn't do anything for me. But when Muhammad Ali did it, it did loads for me. And that's, I guess, the challenge is, how do we make sure that we are talking about stigma and shame and the role it has in actually making things worse? Mm-hmm. I'm never worried about our service users, our clients, our parents, our family. I'm never worried. I'm worried about the self-esteem, but I'm never worried about dyslexia, ADHD, or at all. I agree. And so I guess that the space is, how do we protect the self-esteem to make sure that that doesn't make the impact worse? Well, we do it by talking about it like we're doing here. What a great space to, what a great way of having a Sunday doing that.
We just need to have many more, and not just us, but getting more communities, more regions to actually have these conversations. I think one of the beauties of the moment is the fact that we're now getting used to Zoom and getting used to Teams. So it should not just open us up to parents, but maybe some of those kids that only communicate via social, whether it's social media or these virtual platforms. So I just want to say, thank you for this initial conversation.
Yeah, it's the beginning, isn't it?
I
know it's not the beginning of everything, but it's the beginning of this next phase for us anyway.
So in terms of if anybody has any questions after this, who should they go to? Jannine, Atif, all of you?
Yeah, so should we put our email addresses?
I was going to say, if Jannine, if you put the the admin email in the chat again, I'm guessing that people who registered for the event, their email addresses are kind of, we have on record, so we can send an email out once the recording is ready anyway. But
so I'm going to switch the recording off now. Thank you everyone for joining us. This will not be the last time we have this discussion. Really appreciate everyone's input and attending. So I shall switch the recording off now.
Okay.
Thank you.